Morning, everyone. My name is Kieran Greening, a safety advisor with the Saskatchewan Construction Safety Association. I'm here today to talk about asbestos in this week's edition of Toolbox Tuesday. So we'll talk about some of the safety things, some different things that happen, health effects, and we'll dive into that for the next 15 minutes or so. So please stand with me while I share my screen here. So what is asbestos? Asbestos is a generic name given for 6 naturally occurring fibrous minerals. A fiber means that it's a particle that is more than 5 micrometers in length and having a length to width ratio of 3:1. So it has to be longer than it is wide. Based on their physical and chemical properties, there are 2 different major groups of asbestos, serpentine and amphibole. So serpentine asbestos are long, flexible, and curved fibers. They can be woven together easily. So these are more used for manufacturing, whereas amphibole fibers are straight and stiff. So these are the fibers that are brittle, look like a rod or needle shaped, which limits their commercial usefulness. Usually this is the stuff that is blown in, and it's also the most harmful. So there are 5 subtypes of amphibole asbestos, including crocolidite, blue asbestos, amosite, brown asbestos, and the rest of those 3. So as a material, it has been used for building and products due to its flame resistance and deterioration resistant qualities. It also happens to be extremely hazardous to organisms that breathe with their respiratory system. It's a well-documented carcinogen, as well as it's a hazard when it's ingested into your air exchange regions of your lungs. So we're going to talk about how asbestos enters your body. So if you look at the screen here, you'll notice a picture of a respiratory system. So it has different things, starting with your nose. Your nose, your mouth, your tongue, your pharynx, which is your vocal cords, esophagus, your trachea, bronchus, bronchioles, and alveoli. So if you imagine an alveoli is a little air sac that looks like a bunch of grapes. So when asbestos fibers are disturbed, they become airborne. These fibers are many times smaller than a human hair, making them extremely respirable, which means you can breathe them in. Many of the fibers will become trapped in your mucous membranes of your nose and mouth and throat, where they can be removed, but some pass into the deep regions of the lungs. They also can cause hazardous conditions when they get swallowed into the digestive tract, because once they're trapped in the body, the fibers can cause a different range of problems. So we want to talk about the mucociliary escalator, which is a bodily defense mechanism designed to remove dust and debris from your respiratory system. So you might notice this picture from the respiratory system presentation we had last Wednesday. If you're interested in learning more about the respiratory system, I would highly recommend that webinar. So mucociliary escalator has cilia, or little arms, that pull mucus from the walls of the lungs, throat, and nose. So your mucus collects the debris larger than usually 5 nanometers, and they get caught and they get coughed up. So that's what phlegm is. Some of the asbestos fibers do make it through because they act like a gas because the fibers are so small. So to explain the gas exchange region, it's where your body exchanges oxygen for carbon dioxide, which is the byproduct we create. So when we get asbestos fibers collecting in those regions, you can imagine the little air sacs in the right-hand corner. So you take a look at those respiratory zone, it exchanges the CO2, the oxygen for CO2. And if that wall becomes coated with scar tissue from asbestos fibers sticking to it, it will lose its elasticity and its effectiveness to exchange oxygen for CO2, making it harder to breathe. So when asbestos, or pardon me, mucus comes up through the mucociliary escalator, we can either spit it out or swallow it. So when we work with asbestos, fibers going into the digestive system can cause other nasty diseases. So how can we prevent exposure? By using the hierarchy of controls. So if you might have seen this if you watched any of our webinars in the past. So demolition is often a precursor to any sort of construction. Demolishing walls, ceilings, flooring, mechanical, drywall is a very, very common practice when we're doing demolition. So when we look at the projects, there must be consideration given to the presence of asbestos in the planning stage of each and every job. So if we ignore buildings that are built previous to 1995, we can seriously increase our chances of coming into contact with asbestos. You might leave you wondering where asbestos lies in a building. And that's a tough question to answer. There's a lot of potential locations that asbestos products have been used. So as we plan to demolish or renovate the property, we must inspect areas, assess the risk that asbestos may be present, get blueprints for the building, ask the question to the owner, or find out when was this house built. So if it was built previous to the year 1990 and potentially up to 1995, there's a very good chance asbestos is going to be present. So it shows the many applications asbestos had. With this in mind, it's important to acquire awareness training to be able to spot some of these materials because they might be hidden at a first glance. So just within, pardon me, ceiling tiles are pretty common. Flooring tiles, paint, drywall, different building materials, a whole lot of it contains asbestos. So when we talk about protection from these particles, respirators are a main piece of PPE that is going to be required when working in an area or where an exposure is likely to happen. So if we know when we're going to test samples or we're going to take a piece that we think might be asbestos, it's important to have the right protection in that instant. So when we take a look at the respirators on the screen, you'll notice the top left is an N95 looking mask. So potentially there's 3 different ratings and 3 different efficiencies. So if we look at N, that means not resistant to oil. If it has the P rating, which means it has some resistance to oil, strongly resistant to oil, and R means some resistance. So you look at the 95, and it means it filters at least 95% of airborne particulates. 99 means filters at least 99% of airborne particulates, and 100 filters at least 99.7% of airborne particulates. And it's a disclaimer that these efficiencies only work if the respirator fits and is fit tested by someone who is competent and qualified for that. So I just want to show a powerful piece here, and it shows with the width of a human hair, which is quite wide compared to an asbestos fiber. And asbestos fibers shown are the little particulate pieces. So it's important that we do fit testing because if one of these particulates gets through on a mask, it can go into our respiratory system. And the fact of the matter is a human hair is much, much larger than these fibers. So these fibers will go around your hairs. Having a proper fit test with the sealed respirator is extremely important in all the instances where you might be exposed to asbestos. And some quick regulations. So I'm going to read this straight from the book here. Subject to subsection 3, an employer, contractor, owner shall identify and keep a written record of the following materials that the employer, contractor, or owner knows or may reasonably be expected to know are present in a place of employment and which workers may come into contact with. A, asbestos containing material. Any material likely to contain asbestos Any material likely to contain asbestos that is deemed asbestos-containing material for the purposes of this part until the material is determined to be asbestos-free. So that means that if a worker spots asbestos and asks that it must be tested, if it's a reasonable ask, potentially it contains asbestos until you are alerted that it doesn't by someone who has tested it in a laboratory. So it's important to know that it is your duty as an employer or contractor to ensure that your workers are provided a health and safety workplace. This can't be provided if there is a risk of asbestos exposure or any different material like that. So that is my short version of my asbestos presentation. If you have more questions, concerns, feel free to reach out to any of the advisors. They're listed on our website. If you already know an advisor, reach out to them, get some information. We can come provide this presentation for your workers or potentially watch these on YouTube. Watch out for our next Toolbox Talk next week, as well as our next webinar tomorrow. That is all for my asbestos presentation. Thank you.